It is my great pleasure to introduce and invite good friend, colleague, and esteemed academic Professor Kailash Bhatia, fondly known as Kailash by the movement disorders groups all over the world. He's a very popular teacher, excellent orator, great friend and colleague. Kailash, very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Tissa, and thank you for that very nice introduction. And I've known you, we have similar backgrounds. I hail from India, you come from Sri Lanka, just next door, and our stories have been very similar. And it's a great pleasure for me also to chat with you. And you have made a very nice name for yourself as well in the World Forum in Neurology and, of course, movement disorders.
Kailash, my first question is, I know you are very passionate on brain health, you are very passionate on movement disorders. You are the last fellow of a great late Professor Marsden. Kailash, how excited are you to see World Federation of Neurology and Movement Disorders Society, both organizations you are heavily involved for a long period of time. How excited are you to see these giants joining forces together to celebrate 2020 World Brain Day throughout the year, specifically around 22nd of July, which is the birthday of WFN, to talk about Parkinson's disease and have this ambitious agenda to end Parkinson's disease?
I think it's a really unbelievable and fantastic opportunity. I think given the, as you said, the Movement Disorder Society of India, of International Movement Disorder Society and the World Federation of Neurology, as you rightly pointed out, are two major international organizations. And for them to come together for this venture for World Brain Day, and particularly for Parkinson's disease, and as you put it, eliminating Parkinson's disease in the world, this is quite an amazing venture, which I think would go a long way in trying to deal with the problem of Parkinson's disease, which is a pandemic worldwide. So as to say, it doesn't spare and it's not just restricted to the developed countries, but it's there in the developing countries all over the world, Africa, Asia, etc. So it's really a huge problem. And I think finally and thankfully, we have these two major organizations, and it's really exciting that they come together, they share their resources, and are able to deliver some major momentum, I think, trying to help people with Parkinson's disease, which are worldwide. So I think it's a really exciting time.
And we both invite our friends and colleagues all over the world to visit websites and use the material to advocate for Parkinson's disease and brain health.
Indeed. So there is a vast resource available at the MDS site and for information about Parkinson's disease, which is downloadable either through the WFN or through the MDS forums. And this could be very useful for local, local organizations to be able to download them and use them for information for their local populace. So they could, for example, translate it to their local language. If somebody in, needs it in India, in Kerala, for example, it can be, translated for that. It could be translated into, different languages from as required by the local population. So I think the whole material, which is a fantastic resource, is now at the hands of people who may wish to utilize this in different countries all over the world. So I think it's a really exciting venture.
Thank you, Kailash. I'm going to change the direction of this chat predominantly with the view of inspiring people who might drop into our YouTube channel to see if Professor Kailash Bhatia could do this. I could possibly do this also. So let's go back to your roots to this chat. Tell us your school days and high school days, and how did you end up doing medicine, and what motivated you to pursue studies in medicine? And then we'll come to neurology and movement disorders as we go on chatting.
I must say, I wouldn't say that I grew up with the altruistic, this about, doing medicine um, um, to help, people, etc., as is often made out by people. In India, when we were growing up, the middle class families, there were two main things that your parents wanted you to be: either be an engineer or take up medicine. And I was fortunate to get into medicine. But after I was in medicine, and if you ask me now, would I think of any other career as an alternative? I would say no. So I think once I reached medicine, I really enjoyed it, and I got into neurology. I trained in neurology in India, and all along I had really very fortunate to have fantastic mentors and teachers. So Dr. Singhal, Dr. Katrak was my DM teacher, and then I finished off with my training with Professor Noshir Wadia. So I really had the best of the best there in India. And then
They're great big names for junior colleagues if they're not aware of them. They're very well respected.
yeah,
And excellent human beings also.
absolutely. And then I had the fortune of going on the overseas doctors training scheme to England, and through Professor Wadia, he got me over to work with Anita Harding in neurogenetics.
Now,
And while I
stop
was
you there for
there,
a moment. I'm assuming that this is pre-email era. So I'm
it
assuming
is pre-email era. Yes,
you
it was
write
fax
snail
era
mail to
and letter
Dr.
era.
Anita Harding, and you have a bit more interesting story about this. Tell us about your first meeting with Dr. Harding and how that came about. Because this is a lesson for youngsters, how you
Well,
use opportunity well.
she was visiting. There was a World Congress in India, and she was to go on a trip to a trekking trip to the Kashmir area in the Himalayas, and that was cancelled, and she needed an alternative route. And Wadia asked me to go and advise her, and I gave her an alternative route in which she went for, and she was very pleased about that. So we had a contact that
Or
way,
did you
and
just give her the advice and let her to her own devices?
and well, I didn't go with her because she had her own plans. But anyway, once she really enjoyed that trip, and when she came back, she told Wadia that if I wish to come over and there was an opportunity, she would be happy to host me. So um, my interest in trekking helped me at least one step in that direction. And then when I was there in England, I heard about Professor Marsden, and heard about his so-called book rounds where he would have free sandwiches. And I was very impoverished, and I ended up on his book round mainly to have a sandwich, but also got to interact with him. And eventually he offered me a post in fellowship with him in movement disorders. And that's how I started there.
How was it like? Was he a grumpy person to work with, or very friendly and easygoing person to work with? Did he speak much words, or did you see?
He was an amazing man, an amazing person to work with. Very sharp, very tuned in. I mean, really the father of movement disorders, along with Stan Farn. So really entertaining, educative, precise, fantastic person. You couldn't ask for more. And he honed your skills. And of course, if he recognized some attributes in you, he helped you, polish them. So I was lucky that I worked with him for a long time, and he passed away.
This was in
Unfortunately,
Queen Square, Kailash.
I was at Queen Square. Yes, this was at Queen Square all along. and I'm still there. Then later as a senior lecturer and professor from 2004 till now. So it's been I must say I'm very thankful to my mentors and my teachers. I've been very lucky and fortunate all along the way. And had it not been for them, I don't think I would be where I am. So it's been difficult at times, but worth it, certainly.
I'm going to ask a question about this project.
You have that book.
This is one of my favorite books, and this is Marsden's last work. Tell us about how you took this over and completed the project.
Yeah, well, he was every August, I would see him in his library with all these books spread around, and he would be doing something, and I used to wonder what he was up to. And he told me once around 97 or so that along with Ivan Donaldson from he was he was writing this mega book on movement disorders, which would be the ultimate book. And he told me that he's been trying, and you know, these are the days when you didn't have reference manager or EndNote and so on, and you were, you know, typing in things. He would dictate it, then his secretary would type it, he would edit it. So he asked me as I was in 97 whether I would consider joining him to try and finish this book. And I said, oh, no, I've got lots of things going on, because I'd heard that this book had been an unending project. So I was a bit worried about taking it on and then, you know, getting stuck with it. But yeah, as luck would have it, he did write to Oxford University Press asking them whether they can take on another editor. And then unfortunately, as I said, he passed away in 1998. And then I heard nothing about this, but in around 2000, I got a message from OUP saying you had agreed to be part of this book, and are you willing to do it? And I said, you know, it's a very big project. I looked at it, and a lot of it was not written further from 94, 95. So this was pre-DYT1, pre-dopamine agonist, apart from, you know, it was really very old what had been written. So my heart was, I said, well, okay, maybe. And then eventually I started doing it. And it took me 9 years of writing to bring it up to date. And in the end, I had a fellow, Susan Schneider, who helped me, you know, with a few chapters, and I managed to finish it. It was massive work, really massive work.
It's a brilliant book, and I encourage all our colleagues all over the world, if you could, have it in your library. And it's one of my favorite books. And Kailash knows that I was waiting to see this book coming out. I knew that it resurrected.
Well, if you don't read it, you can use it. It's so heavy, you can do your morning workout with it. So, no, but it's really quite an amazing, because it has all the original, you know, stuff. It's unlike any other movement disorder book where people invite, you know, few people to write something. Not that they are not good, but this has really got some, you know, the original graphs, paperwork, even I had to make a decision whether to put videos in it or to have these, you know, the 35 millimeter video clips printed. And I thought they give a very good effect, because you can actually see it there rather than having to put in a CD. And so we agreed to keep it the way it was. So I think it's a nice mix of old. So it tells you historically from the beginning, and it's fairly up to date. I mean, of course, it was published a few years ago, but till that time, at least, it is up to date. I agree. It's really.
It's a classic. It's a great gift to neurology in general.
Thank you. Thank you.
And as you know, Kailash, I have a local Marsden symposium for which you helped me with the video clips in the past, and when you go through the history, you can really see how remarkable the man is. I was recently reading the first Movement Disorders Journal editorial, and the way that him and Stanley Fan used the language to set up this society. And I was asking myself at that time, for him to think that, well, we are going to produce a journal with videos in it. You must have
Very
a
innovative.
unique
That
way of
was very,
thinking, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely, very innovative. And great. And, since then other journals have adopted it, but absolutely nobody would have imagined that, a journal coming with the videos. And, those are those big videos. So you had to put 3 copies and a master copy, and when you send your paper, it was that big of a thing to go in the post with the master copy and 3 videos and your 3 copies of your paper. It was,
Right. Kailash, my next question is, when you look back throughout your academic career, what are you mostly proud of when you look back?
That's a tricky one. I think I would sort of see myself as primarily a clinician, a clinical academic, I would say. And I think I had the good fortune, as I said, with a good training, that I'm able to dissect out cases, and I can combine genetics, a bit of electrophysiology, in a sort of a translational way. I think many people would say that they have one particular interest and they have done a lot in that. I've probably done a bit too much in many different aspects of movement disorders. So I don't know whether I think I've contributed to the field, but I don't know whether I have made a single major contribution, which people say, oh yeah, that is Bhatia's. So I consider myself as a good clinician, and that's my mainstay.
I think I can remind you a couple of contributions. Your writing is exceptional, and every time when I stuck with something and when I read a review with your name on it, it basically dissects it so simply. Like, this is not the forum to talk about some of your work on myoclonus and other entities is almost unmatched. And the second thing is large plethora of fellows that you and your colleagues have trained and then gifted to the rest of the world. I think they continue to mesmerize the field and support that also, and doing these kind of things also.
Yeah, I think that has been one interesting thing for me through my career. Even at the beginning, right from the beginning, I seem to attract a lot of very bright young people, and I'm very happy to see that they are now themselves in the field, as they have become big people in the field themselves. So I started with Mark Edwards, who was my first PhD student, and continued thereafter. And there's so many names now. They are all luminaries in their own right. Susan Schneider, Roberto Aero, Maria Stemelu, Bettina Bayland, so many. If I missed out some, I hope they pardon me. But there are many, many people who have come and worked with me, and I'm really delighted that they are all doing so well all over the world. Christos Ganos, Alex Munchau, Anna Latour, now so many fellows. So,
I know.
and
I think this is something that we should remind Kailash, for our youngsters, young colleagues in particular, and some of old colleagues also. This notion that clinical research need some sort of exceptional circumstances to do is not something that I believe in. As you and me believe, every patient that we come across or everything that we deal with on a day-to-day basis is basically excellent material for us to work on. We should always wear the clinical research hat with us if you were to be a good clinician. Elaborate on that a little bit more.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I keep getting asked this question all the time now that we have this genetics and we have this, and so is the role of the clinician over? In fact, it's the other way around. I feel that this is a time where the role of the clinicians is even more important than ever before. So you have these large sets of, whole genome screening or exome sequencing, etc. And then you come across 10 different variants in different genes. And the geneticist can only ask you and say, which of these are relevant? Okay. They can't say that's the one, sometimes you may be able to do that if it is clearly pathogenic and so on. Quite often, all you get is a big readout, and it's the clinician who has to make the syndromes and be able to say this gene is likely to be associated with this particular phenotype or this particular syndrome. So I think the role of the clinician now is even more important than it used to be before. So you're absolutely right. Every patient has the clinical features, the clinical signs. It's for you to have the eyes to pick it up. I often use this for my fellows, which Marsden used to say about also having the knowledge and the information. What the mind doesn't know, the eyes can't see. So if you're sitting there, you're looking at somebody, but you can't make the connections, you can't see it because it's not obvious to you. It may be there right in front of you, but it's not obvious. So we have to be good clinicians, and we have to continue having the knowledge and the information to make the connections between the clinical science and the information we have. So, this process of education has to be constant and continuing. And I think we are still looking at a period of time where it's very important to have good clinical science before perhaps artificial intelligence or computers take over. But I think there might be still some time to go in that.
I think even with them, Kailash, my prediction is you still need good clinician scientists around to make sense out of them.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, since we are talking about world neurology and world, this is there are 2 or 3 challenges, I think, which I think are important for world neurology in this context. One is this gap between the availability of genetics or immunology or even advanced investigations between the developed and the developing countries. This is a major gap. The second is that it's very likely that particular countries and particular areas or ethnicities will have particular conditions which are local or seen in those populations. So, as I was saying, this is still to be discovered. We don't know, for example. So, for example, if you say LAC2 or one of these monogenic Parkinsons are very rare in India. Okay, but they might have their own particular genes in their own populations. Those are still to be discovered. And the pathophysiology and the treatments, therefore, might be different in those contexts. So I think there are 3 gaps, as I was saying. One, this big gap between trying to make a uniformity and availability of investigations for the populations in the large part of the world, which are not available at the moment. Second, finding the pathophysiological mechanisms, the genetics, etc., in these populations. And therefore, there might be treatments which are particular to those particular populations. This is very important. And the first thing, of course, in this context is information, knowledge. And I think, again, if we come back to the WFN and MDS joining up, this would be very important. This could be an important venture, which I hope the MDS and WFN will take on board. And I think they are. There are, of course, economics and politics and policies and all of that are coming to cause difficulties. But I think with these forums, at least the education, which is the first step, will be achieved. And I think that's very important. The third thing, of course, is that we are talking about new treatments coming out. And these treatments are going to be very expensive. So there have to be ways maybe for people to think in the future, once these treatments, if you're talking about antibody treatments, you've seen what's happened in SMA. We're seeing possibly what may happen in Huntington's, and maybe also applicable in Parkinson's and other tauopathies, for example. So are we thinking already about how we may make available these potentially very expensive treatments? It should not be only for the few, but may have to be provided for a very large population. This discussion is not even started but it is a very important discussion to be had at some stage when we're talking about world neurology.
I think you raised a couple of very important points, Kailash. In fact, we both know that at present, we both live in a pandemic. For those of the viewers, we are married people and we have family life and other commitments just like any other human being does. We have to do our shopping, we have to empty the garbage bag and clean the house at time regularly, those things. So we feel the pain of pandemic just like any other human beings do. But at the same time, on a positive note, I read somewhere that the European Academy of Neurology virtual conference was attended by over 40,000 people because it was free. I was telling Claudia the other day that given that MDS conference is free, there would be people lining up to join the Kapil Sethi, the Tony Lang, the video games, and some of your video shows. I would predict the European academic record to be broken. And by doing this pandemic has created some opportunities for education to be equal. So
yes.
people from anywhere in the world can log into these things and watch a talk of you or a presentation by Claudia or any other big don for that matter. So that bit is happening. Would that happen in treatment? Time would tell us. And for your other point, I think how education is solving these problems. I remember as a third-year medical student in Kandy, Sri Lanka, and I was very interested in brain. And we had this really tough neurology professor who was Queen Square trained, and he was in his mid-40s perhaps, but he had a couple of papers in NEJM by that time. I was reading these journals as a third-year student. So I approached him sheepishly and asked from him, so is it very hard, is it hard to do medical research? He looked me in the eyes and said that, Wijeratne, it is not hard. You just need to keep your eyes and ears open. This paper that you're talking about, what happened was these young girls were coming to me with foot drop and wrist drop, and my books didn't give me an answer. So I was looking for a course, and I was looking for a course. In the process of looking, and as I was suspecting a toxin, in the end, I figured out that this toxin called triorthocresine phosphate was causing poisoning. So he published a paper, and he did talks and other things, and the poison was taken out. That was the end of that particular disorder called gingerly oil palsy. So some of the local disorders, he must have figured this out by listening to Dr. Bhatia or some other thing in the international conference. Who knows? I was too scared to ask those things, so I didn't know much about international neurology at that time. So that's one such great example of how local disorders, good education, inquisitive mind, solving the problem with less money. And you touched upon a very complicated, complex problem, the bringing equity in the treatment. My suggestion is if these global organizations, not only Movement Disorder Society and World Federation of Neurology, imagine if we put all neurological societies together, which actually has happened as Global Neurology Alliance. If they start advocating for primary neurological problems, then the burning issue of how can we train enough neurologists, how can we make sure that the equity of supply of neurologists are there despite the brain drain. I mean, we both educated in one country and left that place and staying in a different country. We give back as much as we can. But that will happen in time to come also. But at the same time, these global organizations and global neurology framework could potentially produce solutions exploring these very important the questions that we must address and discuss. So let's be hopeful that this pandemic would force us to think laterally and think
Exactly.
better and come up with a better world. We were not planning to have virtual conferences before, but that has made education more equal now.
Yeah,
Which
indeed.
is a good thing.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, I mean, as we are aware, pandemic doesn't look at national boundaries.
100%.
So similarly, the approach with regard treatment options or diagnosis, etc., should be in a similar way, without boundaries. And I think if that sort of efforts can be made for the future, and that'll be a very bright future. The last thing I think I wanted to touch on, since we are talking about this topic, we talked about availability of treatments and education, etc., is also to foster local talents, to be able to rise in the in these forums, such as and that is being done by the MDS in a big way, trying to give a voice to the young and people from different countries. I think that's very important, and that's happening, and I'm really happy to see that. So you're able to hear somebody from Sri Lanka or from India or from any countries, and they're, and you get amazed to see all the different videos from these different places which people are, and that will only be possible, and I think that needs to be fostered further if we give a chance for people from these countries, despite some language difficulties or difficulties in the training and being able to make presentations. But despite that, I think it's important to embrace all these different communities of neurologists all over the world for the common good, which is learning, training, teaching, and finally therapeutics.
100%. If the suffering is universal, it's not English suffering or Indian suffering, Australian suffering, or Sri Lankan suffering, or Russian suffering. It's basic human suffering. Solution has to be somewhat universal also. Kailash, before we finish off, I want to remind people that you are the editor-in-chief with Marcelo for Popular Clinical Practice in Movement Disorders. Introduce the journal, not introduce, some people know about this. Tell something about the journal and what do you expect from authors as a journal editor? What are the tips that you like to share if someone wants
I'm glad you brought that up and reminded me to mention this. The Movement Disorder Clinical Practice is a journal we started in 2014 through the MDS, and we felt there was a need for people to be able to present their clinical work. So most of the journals were turning to become more and more scientific. There are questions about impact factors, etc. But there's a niche, there's a need for clinical material to be presented, and a lot of us are clinicians after all. So the Movement Disorder Clinical Practice really is about that. So we have now been in business from 2014. We're doing extremely well. So we have a very large number of papers coming our way. So I'm really pleased about that. Marcelo and I handle the two hemispheres. So I'm on the Eastern Hemisphere, he's on the Western Hemisphere. And we get over 600 papers coming in every year. So yeah, if you have good clinical material, whether that be a case report, whether that be case series, whether you have a nice review article on some clinically relevant topic or even educative topic, or a systemic review, then we are the journal for you. So this has helped people continue with sending us cases. I believe that more people read Movement Disorder Clinical Practice than they read other mainstream journals because it's very clinical, it's clinically relevant, revealing image. How do I? So we have some innovative features. We were the first to start this. How do I, examine a patient with essential tremor or tremor? How do I do this or how do I do that? So that has been very popular. If you haven't yet seen the journal, then I recommend you do that. It's online. It can be accessed through the MDS site or directly to MDCP.
Finally, tell us about your outside neurology activities that people cannot find by just Googling your name. How do you pass time, and what do you like to do beyond neurology and movement disorders?
I like to go outdoors. As I mentioned, trekking earlier. So I still, if I get a chance, I go trekking in the Himalayas once every few years. Locally over here, Snowdonia, etc. I like to write outside movement disorders on neurology. So I like to cycle, run a little bit, so I keep myself out of trouble, keep occupied with other things. And I like to spend some time with my family.
Kailash, it's a pleasure to chat to you, but we both have other work to do also, and you got to do your thing, and I got to get ready with other tasks. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Tissa. You've been wonderful, and I really enjoyed chatting with you this morning. So thank you very much for giving me this chance.
And all the very best, and look forward to seeing you at the nearby virtual
meeting
and the hopefully face-to-face meeting one of these days in time to come. Take care and stay well.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.